How about that insane Raisin Wine?
Let's bottle it up.
So we made this like about 4 months ago, and it's sort of a joke. Because people say that raisins aren't nutrients. And well, they're really not, okay? They're not a significant source of nutrient, but we're not even going to get into that here because I used 3 pounds of raisins in this. No matter how you want to look at it, that was a nutrient. And it worked.
Clarification. We weren't really using them as a nutrient. We were using them as a sugar source.
Yeah, because we didn't add anything else. Just raisins, a little bit of orange zest, and yeast. Well, and water. And that's it. But as you can see, we made a 1 gallon and we've only got this much left. So, it's not an effective way to make a wine, but it's not a bad way. People have been doing it for a very long time. They've actually made it this way. Now, you can use less raisins and make it a little bit different, that kind of thing. We used a lot just because I wanted to see how crazy it could be. But that was 4 months ago, and it was hot when we tasted it. It was just hot. Pure alcohol, nothing else. It did go down to a 1.010 on its final gravity. We don't know what the starting gravity is because of all the raisins, but I estimate this to be probably in the 12% alcohol range because that's about what that bread yeast does. So today, we're going to take another reading on it to make sure it's really done, even though it's really done. And then we're going to take a taste and see how it is, and then we're going to put it in bottles. It actually smells nice now. It was like pure alcohol before, which makes sense. There's not a lot of flavors there other than the raisins themselves. So, yeah, it kind of makes sense.
It's like the color of iced tea.
And it's not floating. Ruh-roh. When it's not floating, A, that means I have to do this and it's all messy. And B, it means that
Still not floating.
It's a very low gravity. Yeah, it's still not floating. I'm trying not to stir up all the leaves or else we will not be bottling this today. Float! Okay, that is like just floating. And it's... Oh, it went to 1.000. So it did actually ferment out a little bit more. Great! This is going to be totally dry. How awesome is that? Means we might back sweeten this before we bottle it. When I pour about that much into the glass, you know we're not expecting to like this. It does have a lovely color, though. It actually reminds me of the date wine. A lot.
Yep.
It has that exotic smell that we attributed to dates. I think it's more of the dried fruit process on those particular things. Because raisins are pretty much high in sugar, and so are dates. So. That is actually really interesting.
It is really interesting.
It tastes like squeezed raisins.
I'm getting the citrus, though.
A little bit, yeah. I think I'd like to back sweeten this.
With what? Brown sugar?
Brown sugar, yes. What that means is we're not going to be bottling this today, but we are going to rack it because it was rough racked, which means we just removed all the raisins. So there's still a lot of sediment on the bottom. So what I'd like to do is get this into a pitcher, add some brown sugar, and then we're going to put it right back in this container and let it do its thing for a while. See if it re-ferments. All right, so we're going to rack this into the pitcher, which, you know, just like we always do. It's just a smaller container, so you want to be more careful. Also, when you're moving containers that have sediment, you want to be super, super careful. Ideally, you don't want to move them at all. Just go and pour our way down. There we go. Let's see. Whoops. Don't do that. It's got a pretty good sediment layer here, so I'm going to try to hold it to the side so I don't get into that sediment layer. I don't want to pull the sediment out, although it almost doesn't matter because this is going to get racked today. Essentially, if we had gone right to bottling, we would have kind of skipped a step today if we could have, which is, you know, a regular rack, but whoop, these small containers, you know. I'm going to flip it up outside. But you can't always skip that step. Sometimes it's good, sometimes you can't.
It did seem to flocculate pretty nicely.
Oh yeah, this cleared out really, really nice. It was
And the Lee's cake is
it's pretty solid.
decently packed.
Yeah, I'm actually impressed with this. This was kind of a joke or a farce when we started making it, but it actually turns out to be pretty decent. I'm guessing the alcohol, like I said, somewhere between 12 and 13%. The taste is interesting. For a dry wine,
Yeah, for a dry wine.
We don't hate it.
Particularly like dry wines, but this
actually doesn't taste bad. I do want to back sweeten it just a little bit, though, like to the point that I'm not going to add a lot of brown sugar to it, but I think it could use a little extra complexity of flavor, too. I get the raisin, but raisin's kind of it's nice, but it's a one note that just, it's a little much sometimes. So I'm thinking, since we have half a gallon, a pound of sugar is 46 points. I don't want to go that high because in half a gallon I'd use half a pound.
How much can you raise it to still keep it to this container?
A little bit. I can. There's that much space.
Okay.
About 8 ounces. Looks like. Yeah. I'm thinking like a quarter pound because a half pound would raise this 46 points. A quarter pound is 23 points. You know what? Let's go with 1/8 of a pound and just go to like a 10-10 to 10-15 range. So 1/8 of a pound of brown sugar. Okay, so here we are. And this is basically microbrewing at this point. I mean, we have half a gallon here. So your numbers get smaller, which means you want to be more accurate with what you're adding. So I'm going to use 1/8 of a pound, which is 2 ounces. You know, it's 2 ounces. It's easier. But that's 0.125 pounds of brown sugar. And before anyone says, yes, I know, brown sugar has molasses in it. That's the idea. But the last time when we were going to put molasses in it, pure molasses will have a much different flavor profile than sugar and molasses mixed together. There's a lot less molasses in here than there is in molasses. So now that we have the sugar in there, I need to mix it in. And I want to be a little careful. I don't want to be too sloppy because we don't want to add more oxygen than is absolutely necessary at this point. Though we're fairly certain it's past 10%, which is like the starting point to give acetobacters problems. Acetobacters are what makes vinegar. Yeah, all that makes sense, right? Okay. Once you get to about 15% ABV, that's when acetobacters really can't make vinegar anymore. But you still can get off flavors by oxidization. So there's always, some point at which you want to be cautious when you're brewing. But I just want to mix this in. And now I just said I want to be all cautious, but there's only a half gallon here. I could whip out the siphon and do the whole thing, but I personally feel that with this small of an amount, I'm not introducing any more oxygen by pouring this into the fermenter than I would be by siphoning it into the fermenter. Just, they're so small an amount, it's not a big deal. But it does seem like I have it all mixed in. I say that now. I'll find out in a minute, though. So what I want to do, though, is pour it very carefully, all right? And like we talked about, this new pitcher is awesome. See that pointed spout? It's just great. It's like a funnel. So I can just put that right close to the edge here. And as I pour, see, it's not splashing. That's not getting oxidized. As long as you don't hear a splash, you're not introducing more oxygen. Well, I mean, a little bit, but not that much. There's a raisin in there. How crazy is that? There's a raisin in the bottom of the pitcher. I was like, what is that? At first I thought it was brown sugar that didn't get mixed in. Nope, it's a raisin. All right, so my rough rack last time wasn't all that great, apparently.
It was rough.
Yeah, it was very rough. But out of 3 pounds, that's got to be what, like a few thousand raisins to miss one. Anyway, so what I want to do now is take a reading so that we see where it's at and find out if it ferments any further. It really shouldn't, but it could.
As you recall, we don't have an initial gravity reading because of the ridiculous amount of raisins we were using as our initial sugar source.
Yeah, we didn't have anything to gauge it off.
So this is just from this point on to see if any more fermentation occurs.
I'd actually like to take a small taste of this too, now that we sweetened it. Okay. Curious. See, now, when you sweeten something like this, you might be saying, well, why didn't you just bottle it? Well, we could, okay? I want to make sure that it doesn't actually re-ferment, but I also like to, once I've sweetened something, give it time to mellow together. I think that's important. Time heals all brews. I don't just say that for aging. It's everything. All these things need to mellow together. Now, I had said we wanted it to be somewhere between 10:10 and 10:15. It's actually 10:14, so that's perfect. Can you grab that glass for me?
Take it out.
So at 1014, I'm thinking this is probably going to be just sweet enough to taste nice without being overly sweet and taking too much away from what it already had. Because, like I said, this actually tasted sweeter than you'd think, even at 1.000. I'm not going to smell it, because I always do that, and I say, oh, it smells the same, because sugar doesn't change the smell necessarily. It still has the nice astringency and the tannins at the end. The finish is nice. It feels very thick. It's very rich, like extremely rich. But I think that's the right sweetness.
It does taste very similar to the date wine,
It
particularly
really
now that
does.
you sweetened it.
I want to let this sit for like another couple months in this vessel and see what happens to it. I think this is going to improve over time and get that much better. When we revisit, we might sweeten it again. I don't know yet. That's why I didn't want to overdo it right now. I want to put some in and see how it goes. Let's put that cap on there. Okay, so it's been 3 months. We put this in the corner to let it think about what it's done. And now we're going to take a reading on it and see what it did. So just take the lid off here.
The first thing we can see is what it did. Is it got
It is
really clear
dark.
and really dark.
It's really dark. Okay, so I want to take a reading. Oh, I already got the stuff. Look at that. She has me so prepared here. It's amazing. We were at 1.014 when last we checked this, because we did add 2 ounces of brown sugar to it at that time. I'm expecting that it might have dropped a little bit, but I don't think it went much further. It's actually a really awesome color.
It reminds me of coffee in color.
It really does. Looks kind of like whiskey. Is it floating?
No, maybe.
It's not even floating! So it went dry again. How about now?
Yes. Just
Floating is floating.
hey, it's true.
Oh, 1.014. So it didn't move at all. That's like
Oh,
perfect. But we're going to take a taste. All right, so I'm just going to pour off a little bit. That's a good, snortful. Is that a thing? Snortful?
Sure.
Doesn't your mom say that?
That sounds like something my mom would say.
That's a
yes.
Judaism. Hi, Judy. I know you're not watching because you don't watch the mead videos. Wow, the aroma is intense.
It's nuts.
It's just raisins and an orange and bread yeast with brown sugar. It's like the simplest thing ever. But that color is like incredible. It's like caramel. I actually kind of like that.
Yeah,
It tastes like a Bochet.
it does. It does.
It very much tastes like a Bochet. And I have to go with it's the sun-dried portion of the raisin, giving it that caramelized flavor. It's actually really nice. This is kind of cool. So what started out as kind of a joke is turning out to be something that I might make again. We did make a raisin mead too, which actually came out quite nice as well. This is richer than the raisin mead. Of course, this is much more concentrated raisin.
Ridiculously
There's more
so.
raisins in this half gallon than there was in the full gallon of mead. All right. And as we always do, we're just going to rack it off. This is harder to do because it's a smaller half gallon container. But, same concept still applies.
So because it's so dark, we have our
Hold
our
that guy.
cap on our auto siphon because we literally
I can't see the
see
bottom.
down there.
I don't expect that there's much sediment, but you never know. So rather than take a risk, we do that. And keep it in the jar. Okay, now that we got to the bottom, I can see that there is really no sediment here. So you know what? I'm just going to pour that last little bit in. People are going to ask me, what is the ABV of this? I believe we said there was an estimate in the first video. I'll have to look at that and find out, because that's the one thing I didn't check. We, look at the videos before we start a new one, and I just don't remember what I said. It's raining. Can you hear that? I don't know if you can hear that. All right, so when we bottle, we just basically use an auto siphon, and we do use one of these guys, which is known as a
Bottling wand.
and the end is a
Stem valve.
I call it a springy thingy. Used to. Then somebody told me, no, it's a stem valve. So now I call it a stem valve. I always do a little tongue-in-cheek just to pick on them. They probably know it too. I don't mean anything by it.
All right, so you can tell by our selection of bottles, the majority of them are our amber-colored beer bottles, but I did want to select at least one that was clear so we could see just how crazy dark this beverage is.
It's pretty dark.
So we got 3 full bottles and 1 almost halfway full
Yeah, these
bottle.
are 16-ounce bottles. These are not 750 ml. So they're a little smaller than your typical wine, but that's okay. We just happen to have them handy, so that's what we're using.
But as you can tell from the color difference, this is the clear one. This is the amber bottle.
I don't think you can even see a difference on camera.
They look the
probably
same
look
color. That's so dark.
Yeah, amazingly dark. But what we're going to do is one of these will be put away for a whole year. This one that only has up to about here in it is going to be our taster. So we're going to drink that in about 10 minutes. And you'll see that a couple days after this video. And then the others, we'll probably drink those along the way. This is actually a pretty interesting brew. It came out far superior to what I expected it to be, so it's kind of cool. But be on the lookout for the tasting video in just a couple of days. And if you like this video, look up. There's probably another one up there. You might like that one too.